western segment of the Indo-Pacific, which is the Indian Ocean. So you are all aware that the problems about which land features generate a territorial sea, which ones generate a territorial sea plus an EEZ, what happens to low tide features, are they capable of generating anything at all, what actually constitutes an artificial island, in what manner can reefs transform themselves over into rocks and rocks into islands, and over what time frame? So is 200,000 years okay? Is 2,000 years okay? Is 2 years okay? And what is the answer that we might be wrestling with now? Because it's very important for us to understand this and to debate this. These are questions that China is posing, and we are, if we have no coherent responses, then China will simply run hoops around us. Similarly, what constitutes permissible or lawful activities of other states within these various maritime zones? These are at the crux of the South China Sea imbroglio, and I cannot imagine that we could have actually had a better interlocutor than Dr. Do to talk about these things. I understand that this IEPL will focus upon the South China Sea. It will focus on the larger issue emanating from the South China Sea vis-a-vis the rules-based order, because many questions arise. We all use the term rules-based order, but we don't always mean the same thing. So is the rules-based order the behavior pattern dictated by UNCLOS and the SUA Convention, the IMO, and the subordinate conventions to the IMO? Is the rules-based order in some minds to be a trading order? Therefore, is there a clash going on between the Bretton Woods institutions and the new Asian or Chinese-driven or China, India, Vietnam-driven approaches? Then there's this whole business of rules-based order. Does order imply a particular form of governance? Do we have to say that only democracy? Then democracy is defined differently in different countries. There are people's republics and there are people's democratic republics. Some of them are more democratic, some of them are less democratic. But what does more or less democratic mean? So this rules-based order is not an easy animal to corner and to simply be able to spout it. Normally, when we discuss things with diplomats, we are all careful. We are careful, and the diplomats are even more careful. Fortunately, in the case of Vietnam, for the first time, I think in a long period, we have got two eminent, if not preeminent scholars and the heads and deputy head of the Vietnam embassy in India, both having academic credentials, which are quite impressive and are quite laudable. So from time to time, we have the great benefit of having these two wonderful representatives of their country simply taking off their diplomatic hat and putting on their academic hat, and then saying things that we might not always have associated with the careful dance of diplomacy, not willing to offend anybody. So to that extent, I think that all of us, I and all the listeners, viewers, virtual as they may be, are in for a right royal treat. So I won't take up any more time. I want to once again extend my own, and on behalf of the National Maritime Foundation and on behalf of my chairman, Admiral Lamba, our collective thanks and our collective welcome, both in one go, as well as the identical sentiments echoed, I'm sure, in the minds of every one of our viewers, many of whom are eminent and preeminent in their own rights and in their own respect. So thank you once again for being with us, Dr. Do, and we are looking forward to a wonderful session with you. I have now finished 9 minutes and I'm going to stop. Over to you.
Admiral Chauhan, do I have the option to quitting?
Dr. Do, if I may request, a couple of minutes before we proceed into the lecture.
That's right.
So, first of all, I want to thank Admiral Chauhan for his remarks and setting up this stage perfectly for all of us to participate. Ladies and gentlemen, before we move forward, may I now request you all to kindly switch on your cameras for 30 seconds or so as to allow us the luxury of taking a good group photograph for the event. As you switch on your cameras, please give us a good smile so that we can have a better photograph. I'll wait for 5 more seconds. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for supporting this request. And you may now switch off your cameras and do ensure to check whether the mic is on mute mode or not. Do mute your mics. Now we move on to the segment that we have all been waiting for, and will now launch into the lecture. It is now with an abiding sense of honor that I will now request Dr. Do Hai to deliver the 10th Eminent Persons Lecture organized by the National Maritime Foundation. Respected sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Satyam. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Strength 5.
So, respected Admiral Sunil Lamba, and also respected Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, I would like to thank you and also thanks National Maritime Foundation for this privilege to deliver lectures on Vietnam and the South China Sea. I'm not sure that I can meet the expectation that Admiral Pradeep Chauhan put forward, but I do try my best and take in the case of Vietnam behavior in the South China Sea. And this is my topic of my PhD dissertations and so my research for a while. And very unfortunate that I am a scholar turned to diplomat. So as Admiral Chauhan who said that I think it better that I would talk about the issue from a more personal perspective, from more scholarly perspective that I have done, so that it gives me more space. And of course, what I presented today does not necessarily reflect, what is the official positions of the Vietnamese government or any institutions that I work for. So please bear with me with that. And I'm trying to I'm not sure that I can answer the old question raised about the geopolitical, geo-economic strategies of Vietnam, but I do try to explain how Vietnam behaves in South China Sea in a particular way. So usually the puzzle for me, when we look into the case of Vietnam, of course, we see that the South China Sea usually we often said as a test case for the peaceful rise of China. And definitely many countries and many scholars and also politicians also want to look into the South China Sea to see how a rising China's behave and how have the regional countries reacted to the rise, and also we see the rising assertiveness on the part of China. And of course, I encounter many questions that people raise, given the asymmetry between Vietnam and China, and what really a lot of pressures in the Eastern Maritime Front of Vietnam, why Vietnam has not sought a military alliance with the US to counter China. Of course, its own starting point from the realist perspective, if one counter a bigger power as a threat, it usually tries to seek a counter waging option so that it will have some level of protection. The third question I usually encounter that why has Vietnam taken China to the arbitral court at the case of the Philippines? Why Vietnam behave quite differently? Why not Vietnam behave like Malaysia, and also that type of court diplomacy? And of course, also the last question is also really a puzzle to me. I mean, in my thinking that, given all type of similarity in the political system and socialist ideology, and also maybe the benefit of being friends with China, why Vietnam not accommodated with China? After all, I mean, international law is made by people, and UNCLOS is a legal system, and that will evolve. So why not Vietnam had tried to accommodate with a various proposal on the part of China on the South China Sea? So that all, give some premise to my research into the issues and also come up. So my presentation today will touch upon 5 points. So what is, of course, I start to see what are the Vietnamese views of the South China Sea, how the South China is perceived from the Vietnamese perspective, and second, what are the claims and also what are disputed, and of course that the third one is what do Vietnamese pursue? So what I try to explain to Pradeep that what is really the key geo-economic and non-economic objective of Vietnam in the South China Sea. Of course, and we come to the next part is about the key challenge, and of course how Vietnam responds to that challenge. Of course, how Vietnam view the South China Sea, of course, we have to go through the long course of history and how Vietnamese have interacted with the sea. And you know that the Vietnam, along the course, the Vietnamese people believe that this, the Paracel and Spratly are two a group of insular features in the middle of South China is part of national patrimony, or part of its political geography. And of course, the Vietnamese literatures and so books and imperial decrees also show that the Vietnamese interacted with this lands at least from since the 17th century in the before the Nguyen dynasty. And of course, the Vietnamese feudal state is the only one state that act as a sovereign to claim this group of islands. Of course, also it mentioned in the imperial decrees. Also in 1986, the Zambong Emperor also claimed sovereignty to that offshore islands. And of course, that kind of administration continued to exercised by the French Indochina at that time as a colonial power occupying Vietnam. And of course, they took the claim to the offshore islands. China came only in 1909. And of course, at that time, the China so much worried about the Japanese coming into that region. And they start to send the people to the Paracels. But of course, it appeared in the Biohaton research that in 1930s and 1940s, the Chinese have little awareness of the distinction between the two groups of islands. And of course, when the dispute came up and the French bring the issue to the Chinese Empire and asked them to the court, of course, the Chinese emperor refused to take it to the court. And of course, the Vietnamese also believe that the China use of force in 1974 and 1988 to occupy the Paracels and also part of Spratly are unlawful. That means that that the Vietnamese, in the Vietnamese mind, the Paracel and Spratly, the Vietnamese claim to the Paracel and Spratly as superior than the subsequent claims. And of course, they also study the Chinese claims and also so many flaws. And of course, most of the time is the China talk about the first discovery, but it's mostly from the individual rather than the state entities. And of course, along the way that when Vietnam entered the two wars with the French and US, I think that the people grew the awareness of the seas and islands more as a security buffer. And of course, in the post-war, in post-1975 victory, so the strategic thinking And also coincident with the rise of the UNCLOS system, most of people, the strategic circle in Vietnam see that the maritime corridor along the coast of Vietnam is quite vulnerable, and of course very virus navigable river across the country, especially in the north and the south, the deltas. So Vietnam is very vulnerable to the seaborne attacks. And of course, you see in the middle of Vietnam, so there's no strategic depth. The distance between the 2 points is just about 50 kilometers. So I think that from the strategic point of view, that Vietnam very vulnerable from the sea. And most of the attack in the modern time is not from the north, but it's from the sea. So that's the reason why that the sea and islands were viewed as a security buffer. Of course, the island is seen as a very critical outpost for the country's security, and also maritime zone often see as the security zones. That's the reason why Vietnam drew a baseline, straight baselines, and also think about the low of the sea, the rising low legal maritime system as a tool to defend themselves rather than to claim the rights, and also as a system to manage the maritime relations among the states. Subsequently, when Vietnam opened up itself in 1986 under the Đổi Mới program, so the sea is now be part of. I'm sorry a bit because I see the battery running out in my MacBook, so I need 1 minute to plug it in. Now it's all set. So subsequently, when Vietnam is opened up, that Vietnam see the sea as a pool of resources, especially the hydrocarbon and fish, that is very important for the national development. And we mentioned that at in 1990s, the income from the oils and gas in the South China Sea, from Vietnam continental shelf, is sometimes accounted for 30% of the national income. That is significantly high. And of course, the fish stock is very important a source of protein for the local communities, and also for the export for the hard currencies. And that time you see how important it is. Vietnam see the sea vary from the different perspective, more from the economic standpoint. And gradually, and when Vietnam is growing and growing, we see also another features become very important in the strategic mind, and sea and ocean as medium for trade. And Vietnam now is really a trading nation with a total trade volume with the world is about 200% of GDP. We have Mr. Ali Chance here, Vietnam only after Singapore. But of course, among the Vietnam's mixed economy is too much open, and of course is sea trade very critical for also the national security as well. And definitely the ocean freight is vital for Vietnam. And it's of course also see increased interest in freedom of navigations and also overflight. And definitely from the geostrategic point of view, we see that if you see the South China Sea aspect, if you see if the as of course is cited from Mr. Fas Laben, an Austrian strategist, who also the former Austrian defense minister. He give it the pictures, and definitely is reflect and some concern, some part on the Vietnam to see how it blockage both from the land also from the sea. And definitely is a terrible nightmare if you see the South China Sea become dominated by one actor or not. I'm just check that everyone is still awake, because I will usually sometimes it just listen to yourself is.
So we can hear you. We can hear you, sir.
That's good. So I came to the second point about the claims and the disputes, and it's very important to see who claim what and also what are under dispute. And of course, you see that the occupation of Spratly group and also the things And of course, Vietnam is one of the occupied the most features in the south, in the Spratly, but the paracels under definitely the Chinese control since 1974 after the skirmish between the South Vietnamese forces and also the Chinese one. The China also occupies 7 reefs and turned on to the artificial islands recently. And also we have also Malaysia and also Philippine occupations as well. But if you see in the map of the South China Sea, currently there's claims and also the disputes, and we see there exists 3 types of disputes that not many people fully understand. I will start it here. First one, we have the sovereignty disputes. It means the dispute over the insular features. We have the paracels, the dispute and the dispute between Vietnam and China, and of course maybe Taiwan in that one. We have the Spratly between the 6 parties, Vietnam, China, Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Malaysia. And of course, maybe we have Indonesia, but Indonesia already denied that they have the dispute. No. The Spratly is a 6 dispute, the cargo show between the Philippines and China. But the second set of dispute also equally important, that the dispute over maritime boundaries and jurisdictions. And of course, here under UNCLOS, every coastal state may claim the maritime entitlements under the maritime zone from internal waters, territorial sea, contiguous zones, continental shelf, exclusive economic zone. And of course, if you have the opposite coast is not quite enough, we have the overlapping zones that need to be delimited. But also we have some dispute over the imaginative 9-dash line claim that China put. If you see on the map, the 9 red line, we see that China put up, the usually called the U-shape or 9-dash line that also overlap with the maritime entitlements of other coastal texts as well. But of course, we come to the third set of disputes is a different interpretations of UNCLOS provisions. It also about the legal status of the features. And definitely we see that if we have a tiny stretch of land in the middle of the sea, if you can put it the island, it would have generate a huge area of 200 nautical miles of the exclusive economic zone and also continental south as well. So of course, who control the tiny features that want to claim that they are islands and who are not want to limit it just a rock or just low tide elevations. And of course, also there's applications of the athletic baseline to the paracel that is exposed by many other countries. And of course, we come to the set of dispute over freedom of navigation and over flight, notably between China and US about the right to do the military exercises in the EEZ, other country. And of course, in this, I think India also stand in the same line with the Chinese on that. And of course, we see that of course UNCLOS is not all set of rules that set of rules, but we have many dispute under the dispute. And of course, in Vietnam, that involved here with it's claimed the paracel silence, it claimed the Spratly, and it's claimed the maritime entitlement of under UNCLOS. And definitely Vietnam along the way. Because it's here, because for many people who are not familiar with UNCLOS, I just gives a thing. So what about how the UNCLOS divided the maritime space into maritime zones with different sets of rights and obligation for the coastal state and for the user state. Of course, we also mentioned the different interpretations about the innocent passage and also military exercises in the exclusive economic zones as well. I will not bog down in that. I will move forward. And of course, the major contentious point in the South China Sea is the China dash line claims, which is many scholars and also politicians view that it's not in line with UNCLOS. But of course, because of that line claim accounted for roughly to 60 to 80% of the South China Sea, cutting deeply into the maritime zones of other countries. So it received a special attentions, and of course we draw a lot of debate within about the legal validity of the line. And of course we have the tribunal ruling recently ruled out any type of possibility claims beyond the permit of UNCLOS, and definitely the 9-9 is very hard to defend itself under UNCLOS. Now I move to what is the Vietnam stand, where Vietnam stand, the claim, and also how it's. So I mean that here, of course, Admiral Do Han also talking about what is really the rules-based orders, and definitely Vietnam see the rule-based order from some point of that. Of course, it claimed the sovereignty over the paracel and Spratly. The significant component for the rule-based order for Vietnamese is UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And the Vietnamese argue that all the maritime claims have to be in line with UNCLOS. And because of China also the party to UNCLOS, and it have the obligation to comply with its provisions. And of course, it have to other country comply with UN Chapter, the principle in settling the dispute among the nations in no threat or use of force. And of course, the settlement has to be peaceful under the UN Charter and also under the UNCLOS framework. And of course, UNCLOS and UN Charter also give some option for countries, for member states to do the dispute resolutions. Also from the Vietnamese point of view, the dispute have to be settled by the right mechanism. For example, the paracel is a bilateral dispute, so it should be settled bilaterally. Thus, partly a multilateral, it should be resolved under the multilateral framework. But some issue, especially with regard to peace, stability, the freedom of navigation, the applications of UNCLOS and other legal instruments, is the international issue because it also involves with other state users as well. It's not only the coastal state. So much of the South China Sea with the right claim, so that is a significant the high sea in between. So definitely the other country also have the rights in the region. Of course, also the country need also to comply with other instruments as well, especially to correct cues, IMO, also the DOC that also put forward for the management and also the resolution of the dispute in the South China Sea. And of course, Vietnam put its position through different channels. It raised the issue to various leaders in the leadership meeting. It also circulated the note verbal to the United Nations Secretary General and to other countries. If you follow up the development in the United Nations, we see there what the people call the battle of notes in the United Nations, with about more than 25 notes had been circulated from various countries, of course also China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Southeast Asian coastal states, but also involve external powers like United States, UK, France, Australia, and Japan, who took up the issue, what is right and what is wrong with the claim in the South China Sea. And definitely we see that the South China Sea is not a local dispute. It's a regional issue, also international issues as well. So vice versa, that drew in the concerns and also the intervention involvement from different external powers. And of course that Vietnam also tried to formulate a position by ASEAN, was in 36th ASEAN Summit in June 2020. The ASEAN member reaffirmed that the 1982 is a basis for determining maritime entitlements, sovereign rights, jurisdictions, legitimate interests over the maritime zone. And of course, the second, also equally important, UNCLOS set out the legal framework within which all activities in ocean and sea must carry out, quote and unquote. And you see that is formulated through the ASEAN countries as well. And of course, it also started up in the Indian-Vietnam Joint Vision for Peace and Security and People, adopted by two Prime Ministers in December 2020, where both leaders emphasize the legal framework set out by UNCLOS within which own activities in the ocean and sea must carried out. I think that the language is more or less the same with the ASEAN country. Now, with that, I move to the key challenge and what happened in the South China Sea over the last decade or so. But also, if you look beyond that, you see that the South China Sea is a long-standing issue. It started, with the early 2020, when of course, when we get to China, jumped from the Hainan Island into the Paracels in 1956. And of course, in 1974, the China EU forced to expel the South Vietnamese out of the Crescent Group in the western part of the Paracels. Because in 1988, when Vietnam is under political isolation, China invaded and occupied seascape in the Spratly. And of course, in 1995, China moved in the midship Rip, and at the surprise of the Philippines in 2009, the China for the first time published the 9-line claim in a note verbal to United Nations, because it never mentioned it in the official document before, but in 2009, in response to Vietnam and Malaysia joint submission to the CLCS, it's a Commission for the Limits of Continental Shelf. So China published the 9-line claim for the first time. In 2012, it brought up the Scarborough Shoal, was at the expense of the Philippines. So in 2013, the Chinese Coast Guard are visible in James Shoal, and of course also it set the permanent presence in Teluk Shoal in Malaysia. And of course from 2013 to 2017, China set up a large-scale islands, artificial islands building in middle of the South China Sea, especially in the Paracel and in the Spratly. And that, if you see, along the course of history, it's not a new one. It already happened for quite a while. And of course, it's not aware by others only, because many questions about the China approach to the South China Sea. What I often that is that China use the many scholars use the term of gray zone operations. It means that it's on the activity and operations conducted under the what they call the thresholds of war. So it means it belligerent enough to not constitute the war activity, but it's significant enough to coerce others. That according to the concept put up by the Defense Department of Defense US in 2010. But of course also the other concept about the hybrid warfare that it defined by as a broad and complex, adaptive, and often highly integrated combination of convention and unconventional means, overt and covert activities by military, paramilitary, irregular, and civil actors, which are targeted to achieve geopolitical and strategic objectives. That concept is put up by NATO. Of course, it mostly refers to the Russian activities in Crimea and also the eastern part of Ukraine. I myself think that what might observe what happened in the South China Sea. I think that the gray zone concept is not enough. It not reflect the full reality in the South China Sea. It should be the hybrid warfare, because that definitely we see what happened in the South China Sea is not what happened on the ground. We also have a lot of political and diplomatic maneuvering economic incentive and also the statecraft, of course, and also we have the propaganda aspect of that as well. If we look into the challenge that Vietnam and other coastal states also face, is a map put by my colleagues in the Diplomatic Academy in Vietnam 2017. Of course, it should be continue to be updated. But I see the intensity of the activities and also the incident happened in the South China Sea in 2009 when the China started to publish, to formalize the 9-9 claims, and also it deployed the Coast Guard and also other vessels, military and paramilitary, and also the militia to enforce the claims. What happened in the South China Sea and at sea? So we see what the scholar called the term the cabbage tactic. Of course, we see that there lost a lot of naval modernization. China deployed whole set of the warship in the South China Sea at the core, but we also have the big Coast Guard cutters running around the South China Sea to enforce the Chinese rule. And of course, as a forefront, we have the maritime militia. We also, there are hundreds of ships, as you see in the pictures, that stationed in the at middle of the sea, which are doing the fishing, and they are well trained, and the ship is a ironclad. It the stout body that can maneuver quick and also strongly at sea. Because we not only see that actors, we see the orbits and survey vessels, and as you see that in 1919, the Chinese deployed the survey vessel, do the vessels in the Vietnamese EEZ, and also later in the Malaysia EEZ for months. I think that all type of that strategy that the China deployed according of different layers of ship to gain the de facto control in the maritime space, in the South China Sea. So if you follow that, of course, it comes up with different incidents. We have different type of information, but mostly we see that different layers of deployment that give the China's the advantage vis-a-vis other claimants. And of course, you see that that here's the 2015 figure. Of course, it should be updated, but the balance of power deeply tinted to China. With Vietnam, it's about 1/5 of China's forces. But of course, many scholars told to me, the analysts told me that the gap is about 10 times larger the Chinese forces. It's not only about the naval combatant, but also see the maritime law enforcement. That also China have overwhelming forces with even with Japan in the East South China Sea. Also about 4 times larger than Vietnam in the South China Sea, and of course even many times larger than Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And of course, China have the best infrastructures in the middle of South China with the artificial islands building, and also on the garrison and fortification in Paracels, and also built up about 7 bases in the Spratly that give China definitely more advantages of the air covers and also the logistic support for all the forces deploying in the South China Sea. And you see that for only 2 years, China total land reclamation in the Spratly about 2,090 acres, about 20 times larger than all other claimants combined in 40 years. And of course, we own the deployment in the weapons in that basis. China definitely have the overwhelming firepower vis-a-vis other coastal states. But importantly, that's we see that China did the land reclamation large scales in the very short term is very detrimental to the marine ecology and environment, as mentioned in many research. And of course, it's not only what happened in the South China Sea, at the sea so low, we see a lot of political leveraging with the ASEAN country. Also, ASEAN very hard to force a consensus on the type of incident related to China. Because ASEAN can agree on many general principles, agree on UNCLOS. But whenever it came down to a specific incident with a name or shaming mission, is usually failed. China pushed forward the bilateralism, was trying to argue that bilateral is the best way to resolve the disputes. It pressed for joint development, because joint development in the Chinese term is mean that, on the disputed waters, and usually that many people try to joke that what the China joint development proposal is that mine is mine, but yours, let's share. So it means that by stopping the illegitimate claim, so China turned some undisputed water into disputed water and pressed for joint development. And definitely, China also emphasis on the implementation of the DOC, the Declaration of Conduct, the side into and two, and of course, later jump on with the negotiation on COC, and of course, it's many try to blame the external power to stir up, the waters in the South China Sea, encourage the coastal state against China, that messing up the face. Of course, if you follow up, it's that many things that we see a lot of political leveraging over there. And not only the political maneuvering, we also have a lot of economic tools and statecraft deployed. And in many situations that the dispute, the incident open up, the China is reported that, some kind of export have been blocked, the tourist flow was stopped, and also the trade at the border also suspended, of course. But not only the punitive actions, but also the China's provide a lot of opportunities, perceived opportunities in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative, originally as the One Belt and Road program. So China's uses that a lot of political leverage to gain the support of other nations, and also to mute it and they protest against its activities as well. And also that I want to refer you to also another aspect that not many people pay attention to, that, and also the free warfare deployed by China, especially try to shift the public opinion to the information warfare, the psychological warfare, and the legal warfare. I will explain more on that term to see that, because we'll see that not only the pattern of behavior happen in the South China Sea, but also happens elsewhere. But the reason why that people usually very concerned and also follow the situation closely. But of course, the perception battle is usually not with sufficient attention to, especially when you see that there are many things happen, that China's definitely try to overwhelm information to shape the perception and to shape the narratives. At the early phase of the South China Sea disputes in 2009, that usually the Chinese frame the dispute as an action and reaction, though that the China reaction over usually excessive. And of course, China take more initiative to deploy their ship and access to gain control. Also, but China depicts itself as the measure response is rather than responsive or reactive to others. And definitely in many publications and many magazines, China claims that its claims are supported internationally. Even sometimes it draw one source elsewhere, another elsewhere, to claim, for example, in the case of the arbitral ruling. So a lot of countries supporting China, but when it drew up on the original source, it's not clear that the countries speak up against or in favor of China. Definitely the psychological warfare deployed in a lot of that in the South China Sea, when China ambiguously mentioned the South China Sea as a core interest, and that invite a lot of comments on that, and was that trigger the fears of the nation for overreaction. It also talked about the seascape trap to international scholar. It published many publications talking about the danger of inflaming the Chinese people, the reaction of next decisions, also about the narrative of 100 years of humiliations as well. Also try to create, to shape the narrative in favor of China on that. Although China claims are legal liquid, but China find many ways to claim the higher legal ground through the adoption of a lot of domestic laws, especially recently with the promulgations of the Coast Guard law, that there are many ambiguities that not in line with UNCLOS. They also publish a lot of historical anecdotes about the China discovers and also to control the South China Sea with the tales of Jiang He and also other expeditions in the past. It also poses a legal counter argument to many research and tribunal rulings as well. It talks very ambiguous and the new terms. I'm gonna try to see it somehow similar to like UNCLOS, but it's not exactly the same. Many Chinese terms like adjacent waters, relevant waters, that create a lot of confusion to many things. Although they sound like the term mentioned by UNCLOS, but it actually not. So, of course, it's just some very example to see that China's among the very first book talk about the context in South China Sea by Samuel Marvin. He claimed that the China have the superior claim in the South China Sea, but most of the sources he cited from the Chinese officials sources. Of course, is also many things that is from the Chinese government, and many things from unreliable sources of the China. Scholars publish quite a lot in the South China Sea vis-a-vis scholars from other nations. Definitely, they have more voices and substantially larger literatures written by the Chinese Chinese scholars vis-a-vis others. And of course, China is also by the China Watch in many important newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, Telegraph. Also, China is also published in Oxford academic journals with the Chinese Journal of International Law. They publish a rebuttal, a critical study of South China Sea arbitration, basically defend the Chinese position line. But it looked like a really academic paper. Of course, the length of that academic paper a little strange, about 900 and 534 pages, a little more than the tribunal rulings. So it's quite substantial article that can put up in the academic paper. And you'll see that China's spent a lot of money trying to build up the different type of platform to project their image over the world. And it's a China Daily site, about 30 contract with 3 newspapers in the world, and to publish, republish, the article from the China Daily, and you'll see how spread out it is, especially in the information front. And not many people know that there's 1,000 article by the Chinese scholar in the scientific journals that also have the 9-dash line attached to the map. And important that the many scholars write to the editor said that the 9-dash line is unlawful, it's already rejected the arbitral ruling. But of course, the editors and also editorial board are reluctant to offend the Chinese scholars on that. So you see that many what we call that the unlawful map or unlawful claim had been pushed into the scientific journal. And of course, the South China Sea and also the Chinese claim also put on movie, and very famous one with the Operation Red Sea, and also the recently with the amicable, and that definitely to see that China has done a lot to legitimize its claims and also to shape the public opinion. And one way or another, that deprive other claimants of the most advanced weapon they have is a public opinion. Was that all time of the Chinese operation and publications in that blur the boundary between the right and the wrong. Now I come down to the final part. I'm not sure that how it would go, but it's a Vietnamese response. Let's see how Vietnam facing up, a lot of pressure in the South China Sea and what kind of option it has. So normally facing a lot of substantial pressures in the South China Sea and maritime domain that Vietnam usually have, other countries have maybe the option of engage with China bilaterally and multilaterally, whether they try to stand up to power or stand up with the law, whether they pursue the self-help action to naval modernization and also bolster the law enforcement capability, also direct balancing by seeking alliance with other powers to counterweight the Chinese power or maybe counterweight the dominating power in the region. So what the Vietnam did is multi-pronged. So we see that often that even though that, a lot of pressures at Vietnam gradually classify claim and also align with claims with UNCLOS. It maintained definitely the claim to the paracels, also the paracel lost to China control, but keep on maintaining that with the acquiesce to Chinese claim. It maintained the claims to the Spratly to the CLCS joint submission and separate submission in 2019. Vietnam clarified the limits of its exclusive economic zone and continental shelf. It also published a claim to extended continental shelf with the little with the triangular shape in the map, and also little one with the darker color in the map in the joint area claimed by Vietnam and Malaysia. In 2012, Vietnam published the Maritime Law of Vietnam, because much to the displeasure of China, that much of the Maritime Law of Vietnam as in line with the UNCLOS. For 2009, the story reported that the China tried to block Vietnam submission to CLCS, but Vietnam finally chose to bring up the issue because it tried to defend its legitimate claim and defined and prescribed by UNCLOS. When the Philippines take the case to the arbitral ruling, although Vietnam is not joined the Philippines, but it did send a statement of interest. It's where it states, mostly support the Philippine submission to the court, and where that also contribution to mention, the proceeding of the courts as well. It also sent quite a few note verbal to United Nations to protest Chinese claims and also try to articulate its claims to the paracels partly and also maritime claims as well. As I mentioned above. In the meantime, Vietnam keep patiently seek the long-standing settlements with its other claimants, because it engaged with in various form and formal forums with China, try to, before they delimit the Gap of Tonkin, now they move beyond the Gap of Tonkin to the area beyond the Gap of Tonkin. And they also have a negotiation with Indonesia, Philippines, and Malaysia, and dispute resolutions. I think Vietnam is a country, it take the lead on resolving the dispute with the neighboring country, with all the land borders set with China's Laos, and 85% of its border had been settled. It had the delimitation with Thailand, with China's, and also with Indonesia on the continental shelf, and they're working on the exclusive economic zone overlapping in this area. So Vietnamese long-standing objective is seeking the settlement, because they believe that the settlement will bring up the long-standing peace and stability in the region. And in the meantime, pending the final settlement, so Vietnam also engaged in the dispute management and confidence building. It engaged in all the bilateral talks with most of the claimants it have the four hotlines with China and also other countries as well. It engaged in multilateral dialogue to build up the DOC and to negotiate the COC, and also talk and build up the code for unintended encounter at seas as well. So many activities to build up the confidence among the stakeholders. Also, Vietnam also engaged in cooperative activities as an interim measure to the final statement. It engaged in almost all the workshop, conference, and dialogues. It conducted a joint scientific survey with Philippines, JOMSAFE, since 1995. It doing the joint survey, trilateral joint survey with Philippines and China from 2005 and 2008. It conducted the joint patrol with China is the Gap of Tonkin. Also, Vietnam and China also established two working groups on the cooperation on the non-sensitive issues and the joint development possibility beyond the Gap of Tonkin, along with the another working group on the delimitation of the area beyond the Gap of Tonkin. It also sent the ship to Port Cole, other country. Also enjoy ASEAN activities with China and with US as well. So many range of the cooperative activities still working on within the bilateral and so multilateral framework to build up the confidence and also to foster the interim measures to the conflict. I have one footnote here that Vietnam is not refused the joint development, but its argument is that the joint development have to be exact in the overlapping area, is not in the undisputed area with other countries. Vietnam pursued joint development with Malaysia very productively in the overlapping area, and it looking forward also working with Indonesia and also try to work out some sort. But it's not sure that how far that the discussion with China is going on that topic. Because also it prepare for the worst. Not in the case, of course, they build up the maritime capability. For in 2009, Vietnam acquired 6 submarines. It also by advanced frigates and also the aircraft, except corvettes. And of course, unlike other countries, Vietnam invests heavily in the Coast Guard as well. And it's also had support by Japan, US, and also India as well in many parts to build up its Coast Guard. And Vietnam also developed its fishing fleets and also to increase the presence at the sea, and also it built up the maritime domain awareness and maritime situational awareness as well. But for the sake of time, I don't have time to talk more about it, but definitely Vietnam do invest in building its capability so that it can react quickly to the contingents, any contingent at sea. And you see that Vietnam also working adapt to the situation to build up its coast guard and fishing fleet in a way that it can defend its legitimate interests. And of course, in order for Vietnam to work with to build up its stages and work that, Vietnam built up a partnership with all the major countries in the world. It have about 17 strategic partnership and about 13 comprehensive partnership. It worked with all the country, very important country, to create a network of partners. Also that Vietnam uses a network of partners also to work on all the critical maritime issue, but also to raise the issue whenever they see that it happened to the peace and stability in the region. And it worked on in many ways to make sure that the South China Sea is a stable and peaceful maritime space. And that's very important for Vietnam in the 7th element is a proper crisis management. So it's always ready for any type of crisis. Of course, we happen to see the Hai An CGU 981 in 2014, the Chinese Hai An CGU DG number 8 do survey in Vietnam. So Vietnam whenever see the infringement to its lawful interest, it persistently and patient to persuade China and also other claimants stand the ground firmly against any type of encroachment, but it keep communication and do the side battle with the information warfare, and definitely to bring up the issue to various international forum. And gradually, Vietnam also tried to manage the national sentiments as well. So unlike the case of 2014 with Hai Anh TG, in 2019, Vietnam may better manage its national sentiment so that it will keep the communication open. It will working on that, but still, working, maintain the overall relationship in good shape. So it's a little bit different from how India to handle the Ladakh situation. For Vietnam, there's still the dispute going on, and also the relation keep growing, and definitely there's a good side and the bad side with that. But there's a lot of things that Vietnam try to also quarantine the South China Sea from the overall relation with China and other countries. So on the one hand, it keeps standing up any kind of encroachment, but at the same time, it maintains the relation with the neighboring country in one way or another. Because Admiral Cho Han talk about the strategic interest in Vietnam in the South China Sea, because it had the dual goals. The first one is defend its legitimate interest and sovereignty, but also the second goal is so important, is to maintain peace and stable maritime environment or stable external environment, so that it can focus on the strategic objective is to develop the economy, the national economy. So it's a dual goal. It's not always easy, with the assertive and rising China, but definitely so far the Vietnam should work well on that. So some concluding points. I think that the South China Sea is very important to Vietnam because it's called the East Sea of Vietnam, but it's then part of the Vietnam national security and development, not only in terms of the defense of the country, but also in terms of economic development, the resources, and also the connections of Vietnam to the world. But Vietnam, though under a lot of pressure from China, but Vietnam see UNCLOS as part of the rule-based order and its critical interest, and it's raised the UNCLOS in various forums and also in bilateral meetings with China and also other countries as well. China poses a long-term challenge and comprehensive and increasingly complex with different types of sets of measures in different point things and different areas that could substantial pressures on the leadership and also on the peoples as well. But after that, Vietnam is not choose to appease China. Vietnam chose to stand with UNCLOS and stood firmly to not only to defend its UNCLOS, defend its legitimate interests, but also its integrity. Because it also stand up as a one partner to defend the third party interests in the South China Sea, in the COC negotiation, and it put out the terms of provision, and definitely its work try to achieve that objective. So I'm not sure that I can answer satisfactorily on the question raised by Admiral Pradeep Chauhan and also other colleagues as well, but I would like to end my presentation here. So, and welcome any questions on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much for an absolutely brilliant and magisterial overview of what's happening in the South China Sea, Dr. Do. You never disappoint, and you have not disappointed this time either. There are a number of questions that have been raised. I also want to say thank you very much for staying exactly on time. And I think that gives us now a reasonable amount of time for us to interact with you. Ladies and gentlemen who are in the virtual audience, I've already received a number of questions. Some of them are mine, but most of them are yours. So if there are additional questions, please do post them, and we will run down these questions right now. Not in any particular order, so I don't want anybody to feel miffed. but I thought I'll club some of the questions together which relate to specifics that are held by or asked by more than one person. So, Hai, do you want to take a break, or are you ready to take on the next bit?
I'm ready for the
Yeah, okay, great. So let me start with a question from Professor Roger Liu, who is from Taiwan and is currently with Flame University in Pune. He asks two really important questions, which are standalone, and one of them is a common one. So he has three questions. The first is, what role does Vietnam expect the Quad to play in the protection of its rights within the South China Sea or Biển Đông? The second question is, how then would Vietnam balance between ASEAN and the Quad, because ASEAN is not always considered to be entirely comfortable with the Quad?
Mm.
The third question that he has is common to a question that I asked, but let me first ask you to take on these two questions about what role does Vietnam hope for or expect from the Quad, and B, how then will Vietnam hope that it can balance between ASEAN and the Quad, which themselves are not particularly comfortable with one with the other?
So thank you, Mr. Roger Liu, right, for that very interesting questions. I think with regarding to the Quad, how Vietnam expect, what role the Vietnam would expect the Quad to. And I think the Vietnam position is that it welcome all the constructive contribution to the peace and stability of the South China Sea, and also the maritime rule of law in the region. So from that standpoint, I think that the group general idea that if the Quad defend UNCLOS, if the Quad defend the rule-based order, that the Quad stand up to any type of coercive and unlawful activity that are welcome. And of course, that also that by stating that general principle, of course, that also not welcome that any type of action that would that create the tensions in an unnecessary way. So not that way that, I mean, that action should, in compliance with the existing legal system that working out. And the questions with regarding to the ASEAN and the Quad. And of course, Vietnam also articulated its view about the regions to the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, and say that also set a number of principles, for example, the rules of law, the sovereignty, no use and no use of force, and cooperative measures under UNCLOS. So I think that Vietnam still maintain that ASEAN centrality is important to build up the situation, to build up, for the maintenance of peace and stability. And in that way that it would expect, the Quad, it not impact adversely on the ASEAN role. But definitely in the Quad, it could understand that the Quad come up with the different forums, and of course that would have some role on the issue discussed on Quad and also equally discussed in ASEAN. So I think that in the futures when it's opening up, that definitely that need some type of dialogues between the two mechanisms in one way or another, that will make the Quad more contributable to the peace and stability and also the rule of law. So it's much about the general principle, leaving the greater space for any type of development and maneuvering that can be adaptive and also responsive to what happened on the ground. So I'm not sure that is could answer that question that way.
Yes, thank you very much. That does, but there is one follow-on question from Dung Phan, and that is, Dr. Do, how is Vietnam's notion of a rules-based order at sea different from the one that is promoted by the Quad countries? Do you see some difference between these two, particularly bearing in mind my own opening comments about some countries looking at the rules-based order, really expanding that rules-based order to trade mechanisms and free trade mechanisms promoted by Bretton Woods institutions and others? So what is your take on that?
Well, Vietnamese rules-based order definitely is much about the existing rules. It's about UNCLOS. It's about contract. It's about the DOC, and that one country committed to that is have the obligation to implement that. Because there's no use of what the UN Charter that on the system that Vietnam maintain and consistently maintain. And we're not in favor of that any type of the value-based alliance, and of course Vietnam. Not sure that I did talk with a lot of experts in Vietnam. We talk about the open and free, and sometimes the free is not been understood well in Vietnam. Of course, if it is the I mean the freedom of expressions are the thing that democratic values. So usually Vietnam not supported any type of value-based coalition on that. But definitely that system of rules, UNCLOS, the no use of force UN Charter, that the rules that Vietnam want to maintain.
Okay, thank you very much. And there is one more follow-on kind of tangential question, and this is from Apila Sangtam, who says, Dr. Do, how is Vietnam or ASEAN Vietnam in particular, or ASEAN in general, how are they benefiting from this free and open Indo-Pacific as it has been adopted by it? What are the benefits accruing to Vietnam from this free and open FOIP construct?
Well, I think it has some advantage, also disadvantage aspects as well. So of course, one thing that many people think that Indo-Pacific is signal the interest and also the attentions of the major power in the region. So that of course that will maintain the balance upon the region. That provide different type of option to other countries in the region, because they cannot, they do not necessarily to rely on one option. But there also are the concerns in Vietnam about the rising of the Indo-Pacific. It means the diluting attention to the South China Sea. So I mean that now country in the region focus not only in the South China Sea, at the focal point, the first gate, for the Chinese to open to the two ocean. So now that with the Indian Pacific, the greater space, and so that is not sufficient attention paid to the what happening in the South China Sea. So usually it's not good.
Okay, well, we clearly have much to discuss about this whole issue, but there are many, many more and many relevant questions that I would like you to, sort of sink your teeth into. One of them I would like to club together, and that relates to this whole business of DOC, COC, the various commitments that China has made over the last many years publicly, some of which you have already mentioned, and all of which China has flouted after making them. So that brings past behavior of China into sharp question when you project it into future. And therefore, the questions are like this. First is from Mr. Chandrasekhar, who says that, what do you feel are the potentials of the 2002 Declaration of Conduct, which is of course still, shall we say, in debate. And so what is the potential of the 2002 Declaration? And then how would that translate into the Code of Conduct? I'm sorry, I said that's in debate, but the latter is. And he's also asked a separate question, which I will club with the India-specific questions, which will come in later. But Attached to this question is another from Amrit Godbole, who says that Vietnam sees UNCLOS and bilateral and multilateral engagements as crucial or critical to resolving maritime disputes, and despite slow progress on the code of conduct and despite China's disregarding the tribunal's award, most ASEAN countries, including Vietnam, have not followed the Philippine precedent of taking the dispute to international tribunals established under or arbitral mechanisms established under UNCLOS. And he would like you to answer this particular. So this is all questions relating to how Vietnam sees these diplomatic efforts for a country that has shown complete disregard for them for the last many years. Why are we still chasing what I might call this chimera? Thank you.
Well, I think that it's very important and very interesting questions about the DOC and COC. And I just think that when China negotiating this DOC, I think the balance of power, I think, is not favored to China at the moment. So China at the moment is significantly stronger than China's in 2002. So definitely, I think that the COC negotiations, I think that they're going to some, what is the progress? They are in the second reading, and of course, would expect the outcome in the third reading. But if the current situation if China maintain that current policy, I'm quite pessimistic about the prospect for a viable and also meaningful code of conduct. And of course, if you see that it reported in the media from also the Professor Kan Thayer, we see many provision put forward by China if they are correct. So it definitely it makes the COC just between China and ASEAN, and also the South China Sea just between the China and ASEAN countries. And that is not very helpful, because the South China Seas is also the international seas, and also the user state have a lot of rights and obligation there. So I think that it's better that the COC have to be meaningful. It should not be another DOC. So that would be not very good. And of course, the UNCLOS, the important, of course, we could not expect the China's behavior change in very near futures. And definitely we see that when there's rising power, they also have redefined their national interest in many ways now that it happened in the past, and the China is not exception. And also even mentioned that, China even behave more nicely, than even some power in the past, right? It's not point to hard power, but China is very sophisticated. So I mean that other country also to be sophisticated in that it has to be patient, and it work with other to make sure that although UNCLOS is made in 1980, but it's still valid. And of course, if you want to change it, you have to change it peacefully. It's not to coercion or other measures. And I think that there are many ways that the people want to add to UNCLOS and also change that, but trying to change it by the brute force or strict coercion is not very helpful. And I think it's in China interest in the long term for doing so. So I think that is an obligation of other country, not only Vietnam, also the ASEAN country involved, also the US, India, and other countries, to make sure that to reiterate to other countries that if UNCLOS is broken, we may have a mess in the maritime order, so that it also the great damage to the ocean, not only in terms of the traditional security to all the coastal state, to all the country involved, but also we cannot focus our focus on many important and substantial non-traditional maritime security, especially piracy, terrorism, and also the degradations of the ecology as well, marine ecology. So I think that it's very important that we have to reiterate, to mention that again and again, and not, step back any type of manipulations and also manipulations and bending the rules for their interest. Yeah.
That was, quite a remarkable mixture of diplomatic nicety and academic forthrightness. So thank you so much. I understand the requirements of other powers and this whole business of exceptionalism. Now let me move to a more skeptical set of questions where, there is more skepticism about everything related to the South China Sea and its resolution of the problems that beset it. First, I wanted to raise a question or articulate a question asked by Commodore Qazi Imdadul Haq of Bangladesh, where he says that Paracels, the Paracel group is now under the de facto control of China, and they are developing it pretty much as they like and in many forms. And the present situation indicates that they are expected to be in control of all these islands of the Paracel group for the foreseeable future. And then he says that the world can keep discussing it over webinar after webinar. But the end result is that China is, in fact, in hard control of this particular group. And then he has another question, which is more specifically pointed to Vietnam. And it says that if China wants to take, if it wants to address those 100 years of humiliation and it wants to take revenge for those 100 years of humiliation, then it should be purely against the Western colonial powers. I've added the word colonial. But why is it against Vietnam? And secondly, he goes on to, of course, reinforce the second question, which I've already asked, the earlier question that I've already asked, which is you can keep having bilateral talks with China, but Vietnam will not gain over Paracel Islands in the foreseeable future. And what are your comments? These are important because I'm going to use those comments to segue into the military aspects before focusing upon the Vietnam-India issues. So.
Well, a tough questions actually. Yes, why Vietnam keep maintaining the claim to the Paracels, although that have very little or maybe no chance to regain the de facto control from China's. And I think it's very important for us that we kept in mind that the illegal or unlawful activities would not be forward. So we definitely assure that that could not be happen in the future. So the only way for Vietnam to regain that island by the act of wars. But definitely that Vietnam is a country experienced a lot of wars in the past. So we choose to maintain the legal claims, and we choose to work through the peaceful settlement. And of course, I think that the current policy Vietnam keep reiterating the claims until I'm not sure until when it's end, but still Vietnam is still that claim. So it's important for us to keep the message go through. And the second, of course, questions with regarding to we all see that definitely the power is very important matter on this equation. And I mean, bigger power definitely have a lot of choices and also the tool, to influence the situation. But I mean, the China also have 100 years of humiliation, and Vietnam have 1,000 years of the Chinese domination. But we don't try to impose a time. We also have a very tragic war with the US, right? And also with number of other powers as well. But of course, it's the history for us to learn, but the history not for us to revenge. And we understand the tragic, the tragedy of wars and how it very disastrous for all the families, and that's the reason why that Vietnam tried to behave very mature in handling the situations, and we don't react it for that. We don't I mean, we all follow, I'll say, to stir up the nationalist sentiment, or to give pressure for other nations, because we know that other nations can do the same. But it's important for us to make sure that we have some capability to defend ourselves and defend in a very good way, and also try to, of course, in the worst scenario, withstand fight and win the war, as we did many times in the past.
There's no doubt about that, and that provides us with the perfect segue into some of the military-focused questions before we turn to China's three forms of warfare. Admiral Shekhar Sinha, who is one of the doyens of Indian strategic thinking, particularly in the maritime domain, has a question which says that he has a hard question since he saw that the defense advisor of Vietnam is present here, though this question is not to the DA, and I expect that perhaps you will be equally well capable of answering it, and that is that what are the possibilities of Vietnam participating in military action against China alongside other friendly countries? And then there is a second question, which is slightly less pointed, but nevertheless equally important. And that is, what is the view of Vietnam and other Southeast Asian nations, in your opinion, on the Chinese comment about the Quad alliance as an Asian NATO? I'm afraid we can't leave this Quad alone. It keeps popping up in the most unexpected places. But here it is again. So maybe these two questions could be addressed by you. Thank you.
No, thank you for posing the tough questions, and I will capable my defense for that. But I think that the answer is no. That we have currently the foreign policy in the Vietnamese defense. So the first no is that no alliance with other country. The second is no foreign military base in Vietnam. The third one is no working with one country another, and the third one is no use of force first. I think that's important for the peacetime. So I think that Vietnam will be reluctant, of course, to join any type of military actions again and the third countries, not alone China's. And even Vietnam, for a long time, it had to change even before that, it seems the PKO is not very good. I mean, it type of intervention, but gradually Vietnam changed, and it worked mostly on the medical teams. But I think that important for Vietnam, that because Vietnam, in the past, we engage in wars with the big power, and there's some part of history we sided with one country against another's big power, and definitely it's not good. So what the Vietnam do, we try to promote the peaceful settlement, and also through the dialogue, and also encourage all the big power to engage in constructive dialogues as well. Of course, I mean, it's a peacetime. I'm not sure what happened in the war times. Vietnam also creates, one if to the for no, if the circumstance changes, and it will consider. But I think that is the general policy now. It try to avoid to enter any kind of alliance, and of course not let alone the military actions against the third country. That I think is that usually it's very hard to imagine at the moment. And definitely the Quad is growing, but I'm sure that I mean, so far the Vietnam is still observing, and with the Quad growing is a fact and the reality. So usually the Vietnam policy, it work with the reality rather than try to go against that.
Thank you. So now let's swing across to other forms of warfare other than simply hard conflict. And that is to deal with the issues that you have raised so brilliantly in terms of the three forms of warfare being adopted by China. And let's talk about that and then swing it across to India. First, there is a slightly more general question. And that is that, justice, first of all, there is a lawfare problem. And that question comes from, let me try and figure it out. Let me try and identify it once again. And it basically says that if China continues to be, despite China, it's from Nitin, and it says that China is a signatory and a ratifying partner to UNCLOS, and yet China came up with this completely bizarre 9-dash line, which has no foundation or connection with UNCLOS or any legal structures, structured documentation. So how do you see China's 9-dash line claim in the aftermath, this part I'm adding, in the aftermath of the tribunal's ruling vis-a-vis Philippines, which specifically addressed the issue of the 9-dash line. And from there, I would like you to also think about another question, and that has been, that again is related to these 3 forms of warfare. And the 9-dash line. So this is from Malvika Menon, who is a very sharp legal intern with the NMF. And she asks that just as China tries to mobilize public opinion by employing psychological warfare and information warfare, but it also adopts legally inconsistent claims such as the 9-dash line, which could result in unfavorable public opinion and which has resulted in unfavorable public opinion. So how does China manage this balancing act? And I think that you might want to address these 2 things.
Well, it's extremely interesting questions about when all the term of legal warfare deployed in the South China Sea. I think different actors, also different stakeholders have different view on that. First one is the 9-dash line. After the two ruling, so I haven't seen that China aborted that concept. I mean, the Chinese scholars and although it little mention on the China response to the tribunal ruling, but it's been raised elsewhere. And also that China, also the scholarly, they also moved to the concept of Nansha Punjao. So it means that the South China Sea islands, and later subsequently involved in the concept of 4 shares. It means that they try to align one way or another to make their claims more in line with UNCLOS, because the 9-dash line, of course, is very hard to reconcile with the provision of UNCLOS. So if now you make the group of islands together and at the same time draw the baseline around the Spratly or maybe the Paracel in the same way, so they have the error claim even bigger than the 9-dash line. But of course, I think that the way China's lawfare is to maintain the ambiguity. So they make their claim is not an actual claim. So there are many hypotheses. So you don't fight with the actual enemy. When you argue with that, when you talk with the 9-dash line, we talk about 4 share. When you talk about 4 share, they can talk about the 9-dash line, and we'll talk about the subsequently, some kind of stretch or different type of interpretations of UNCLOS. So basically, it's very hard for you to argue with the Chinese. So whenever they talk about the 9-dash line, they have the 4th hypothesis. Okay, so we talk about hypothesis, it's not the official's line. The official line is just a line with no coordinates, nothing else. But of course, there's some kind of possible theories behind that. So I think that is the overall strategy is to maintain the ambiguity so that China don't like the idea of court, because the court make everything black and white, right? So that's the reason why I think that the China is involved. If you read the critical study of the tribunal ruling, you see that the China employed many types of theories just to counter and just to refute different decisions of the ruling. That's the reason why that China work on that. But of course, the inconsistencies in the Chinese course, China understand the weakness of their legal claims, so that they try to not to talk about that, not to discuss or debate or any type of official line that beyond that. So all that they talk about very general terms. So if you read the what is that, the statement after the tribunal ruling, they talk about the national window, the internal waters, the terror waters, the exclusive economic zones, everything there. But they don't talk about avoid any type of specificity involved that. So of course, again, you're talking, so you argue with nothing but hypothesis. You're talking about with the empty terms. It looked like UNCLOS, but it's not UNCLOS. But the actual thing happened on the ground. So that creates the space for China to maneuver. And of course, because of the weakness of the claim, so China deploy a lot of information warfare and also legal warfare to make sure that they have the higher legal ground for their activities.
Okay, so now, thank you very much. Now we've got only a few minutes left, and I want to be able to squeeze in the India specific factor. And of course, I think that you will find obviously Indian interest in this section. So once again, staying with that, let me ask my own question now. While you were dilating upon the three warfares of China, that is public relations warfare and psychological warfare and legal warfare, yeah, you provided excellent examples of the strategic communication, because all these are methods of strategic communication. Whereas in many countries, the concept of strategic communication is extremely poorly understood, and it can even come down to, an inter-service rivalry and stuff like that. But strategic communication, these are the examples of strategic communication. Now, what is Vietnam's view? And do you think that India and Vietnam either could or should engage in planning and execution of strategic communication? And if so, how might this be best done? And before you answer that, I also want to ask a question from Ipsa Sahu, who has asked that if China is strategically trying to imprint its point of view, for example, using the movies, and those movies are watched around the world for their cinematographic and photographic excellence, even though the storylines are a bit strange, but they are watched all around the world. So how do you suggest, once again, that Vietnam and India should tackle this as a means of soft power? So Ipsa is using soft power as a sobriquet for what I call strategic communication. Now, we have seen that neither India nor Vietnam, both of whose movies are extremely popular in China, for example, but neither of them are able to match this cinematographic competence of China and therefore make it visually wildly exciting. What should we do?
Well, thanks a lot for the questions. I think that Vietnam also have the communications, of course, is try to get the message, especially the importance of UNCLOS and what the importance of UNCLOS, and also how the conflict in the South China Sea will inflict into all the nation. It try to communicate its legal stand and also its determination with also the Chinese counterparts as well. It also tries to communicate, the foreign policy in a way that, should not be misunderstood with the audience of Beijing, of Washington, also New Delhi, and of course also in Moscow and also elsewhere as well. But the problem for us is that we don't have the much resources, right? And of course, definitely we cannot match China on that. The China worked on that for long term. They invest on the first book in the South China Sea in 1982. That nobody just, had about what is the South China Sea and what type of the activities of the fishermen, other things, and they flood, the scientific forum with all the 9-dash line, and that, of course, many for expert for us, we understand that is not right. But about 95 or 99% of the world population was also the film. They just don't know about that. Basically, we gradually deprive, some, of the most important weapons of the weak we have. And China understands that the weapon of the weak, and they try to counter that by one way or another. And also that, of course, definitely we have, though of course, we also have other advantage as well. With, I mean, Vietnam also other country, because we are a low complying country. I think that they have more advantage on get the message through than China's, and I think of course we're not pessimistic with that, but definitely we have to be ready to engage and also to talk with all type of wrongful message and depiction, uh, and of course, more importantly, that we should not, allow that become the precedent, so that can the South China Sea cases have been repeated elsewhere. I think that it's not very important for all the countries in the region, also for the maritime order. As that you see that people will see that really three warfare really change the perception and thing. So we keep working on that, and also working, sharing the idea, and also organize the workshop. Also encourage other country to circulate their not verbal, their position at United Nations. So we have a number of countries now posted their position in the United Nations by putting the not verbal United Nations, talking about the right and wrong. Of course, the sovereignty issue is different thing, but other countries can talk about the maritime claims. So India can talk about the 9-dash line is not in line with UNCLOS. So we make sure that we have collective message to China that what they claim in the South China Sea is not right. So they should gradually cannot let that kind of claim become a reality, because it may become in realities elsewhere if the South China becomes a part of one country control. So maybe India in the future may round up the Indian Ocean, but it big larger in the South China Sea, and the US will be the Russia and all type of very important choke point and strait will be blocked. That is not good to all, right? It's not good to the world trade and the thing. And of course, sometimes some reciprocity needed. One country could not claim the rights from UNCLOS and decline the right of others. Right. So,
yeah, well, thank you. One more thing is that, for the benefit of many of the members of our audience, sometime in end of August or early September, most probably around the 25th of August or thereabouts, we are planning to have the third of our maritime security workshops with Vietnam. And some of these questions that have been raised, we had already planned what it will be discussed, but I'm going to junk all that and re-look at it, because these issues of strategic communication, whether we should have movies, what should we do? How does China do it? It publishes books, it publishes a series of articles, it buys advertorials, all the things that Dr. Do has already said. So can India and Vietnam do something similar? Now, I have one sharp point of disagreement that we are always lamenting the fact that we don't have resources, but actually we do. We have intellectual resources and we have output. And what we are experiencing, ladies and gentlemen, are failures of imagination, not failures of money, failures of imagination. And those we don't need resources for. We have adequate resources to that. Now, last question. And you don't actually have to address it in any detail because we have only 1.5 minutes for you to do that. And that is, can you identify, this is a question from Dr. Roger Liu and from me, and it says, do you have any specific expectations or hopes in the immediate future that Vietnam has from maritime India, not India in general, but maritime India, especially in terms of the Indian Navy? In other words, what does Vietnam hope that India will do? What does it hope India will not do? And these two things are both important. And if you can't find, if we don't have the time for this here, then I'm quite happy to defer this question to the workshop. And I would like to seek your public acquiescence to rehashing the terms of the workshop to address the many really important issues that you have raised, which lead to tangible outcomes instead of just one more area where we faff at each other. So maybe I'll let you off the hook for this one, Dr. Do, in this question and answer session, because we are clean out of time now. And I wanted to say thank you to you for being quite so sharp and quite so forthright in your answering of the many questions. They ranged across a very large sort of ambit, and you have handled all of them well. And now I'll hand over the proceedings back to Satyam, who is glaring at me because we are running 30 seconds beyond time. Satyam, it's over to you.
Thank you, Admiral Chauhan, for moderating that session. And we are well in time. We're just 2 minutes. And I think, sir, in a webinar, that's very normal. Ladies and gentlemen, the lecture will now move towards its last segment. And now it's my honor to request Admiral Sunil Lamba, the chairman of the National Maritime Foundation and the former chief of the naval staff of the Indian Navy, to grace today's program with his closing remarks. Admiral Lamba, I yield the floor to you, sir.
Thank you, Satyam. Dr. Do, at the outset, I'd like to thank you for an in-depth analysis of Vietnam's position on the South China Sea. I'm not going to try and summarize what you have said, but you have very clearly put out what are the claims, disputes, what are the key challenges, what are the policy choices available with Vietnam. But in a real world, China is a global power whose national power is only growing as the years go by. She is the second largest economy by miles from all other countries in the region. And the gap between China and United States is slowly closing. So she is a power to be reckoned with. And unfortunately, the Communist Party of China and its leader, Xi Jinping, have decided to use this power not in consonance with the rule-based order, or the so-called 100 years of shame, and to rechange the global order and the rule-based order. I think one of the very important roles that the Quad can play, and this came up for discussion, is to ensure that China doesn't write the new rules for the new world order, and it is the Quad and all the other countries together ensure that the present rule-based order, whether it's UNCLOS or other rules which are there, say like the WTO and other organizations, that there are global orders which are there and binding on all other countries. I think this is the most important role that Quad can play and ensure that the rules are not written by China in the foreseeable future. It is a matter of fact that the status quo in the South China Sea has been altered by their capture and redevelopment and claiming of islands and building facilities on them. And it is going to be a very long haul for all the nations of the world to put it back or assume the status quo ante which existed prior. But there have already been changes in behavior of China, like after the arbitration ruling, they stopped referring to the 9-dash line. So already there is a change in how they're selling the story and their claims in the South China Sea. Other is India-Vietnam relationship. They have grown in all dimensions over the years to come. Also in the mill-to-mill and the navy-to-navy, we have worked together in building capability and capacity on the Vietnamese side, and India and in the Indian Navy or the Indian Armed Forces is more than willing to step up. Vietnam is one of the few countries which the Indian Navy regularly visits every year, making a port call, and is welcomed with open arms with Vietnam. This sends a message to the world at large. So there are avenues available of working together, and which you have stated in your talks and briefs and the Q&A. One is to ensure that we follow the present rules as per UNCLOS, because China is a signatory to most of the rules, these treaties and orders, but cherry picks them to their own advantage. Okay. So the international community, the Quad, ASEAN, in my personal opinion, is a divided house, and China has ensured that with the bilateral effect with individual members of ASEAN, that they do not combine together and speak in one voice. But the world at large has now started calling out China very vocally on the illegal claims which they have, territorial claims across in the East China Sea, South China Sea, also on the Himalayan ranges. So the jury is out, and I think the world order is now going to stand up to all these illegal and belligerents of China. In the end, I'd like to thank you for a fascinating talk and your handling of the Q&A, which you were quite honest to put your point of view across. Thank you very much. Over to you, Satyam.
Thank you so much, Admiral Lamba, for your remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, before we leave, let me thank all of you for taking the trouble and the time to be with us for this webinar. I want to once again place on record our sincere and heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Do for the time, trouble, scholarship, and effort which he has dedicated for today's lecture. We look forward to having many more interactions with him in future. And as already indicated by Admiral Chauhan, we will be reaching out to all of you in respect to the third NMF Vietnam Embassy workshop sometimes next month. And hence, please keep an eye on our emails, our social media handle, and feel free to reach out to us in case you are not able to receive any inputs. Ms. Supriya Joshi, our marketing executive, has listed the links in the chat box so you can have the access. And just before winding up, I will request Admiral Chauhan or Captain Parmar if they want to add any last comments since we have a couple of more minutes.
Thank you very much. I'll yield the floor to Captain Parmar and then seek his permission to have the last word.
I had a chat with Dr. Do last week, and a lot of these issues we had discussed. So I just kept quiet because I know his views and he knows my standpoint on these things. But it's very clear that there is a lot of area yet to be discussed to look at convergences and to overcome divergences, especially where ASEAN nations are concerned. Because as Admiral Lamba said, that ASEAN it's understood that it's been fractured for a long time. But given the COVID online webinars, I think the first time when ASEAN met 2 years ago last year, there was one statement that came out very strongly, because obviously when you are online, the chances of you are being arm twisted a little less. And that is a fact that has emerged from the inability of ASEAN to come out with some sort of a strong declaration on the South China Sea. And now is the time, I think the time is ripe. If Vietnam can lead the charge and get ASEAN on board, it will actually in some way, I think, impact the making of the COC. Whether you take China on board or not is a different issue. And whether it helps the cause is another issue. So these are issues that need to be deliberated and discussed. And then, of course, if we look at the Quad and ASEAN's view of Quad and Indo-Pacific, we need to take it on. And we fully understand that ASEAN nations would not like to divert from the convergences they have sought with ASEAN. And it's often said that ASEAN is undergoing a midlife crisis for the past decade. But I think it's time for that to be looked over. And that is one place where I think Vietnam can actually help a lot. There are a lot of other issues, and Dr. Do and I know we discussed a lot, so I'll stop here. And a lot of these issues, I hope, will be discussed in the forthcoming workshop. And with that, Admiral Chauhan, back to you.
Thank you very much. And with the permission of my chairman, I'd just like to reiterate his vote of thanks to Dr. Do, to the officials of the Vietnam Embassy, to the DA in particular, and also to every one of our very distinguished members of the audience for having participated, for having asked questions. And in case I've missed anybody's question out, please accept my apologies. I tried to accommodate all, but clearly there are always going to be some omissions. Now, what is it that we want to be discussing in the workshop are issues that, yes, China is where she is. Yes, she's the preponderant power in the making. So what? So then what? Should we adopt a defeatist attitude? What is the approach that the rest of the world, and particularly in India, Vietnam combined, should offer? If we are not willing to have, as my chairman already said, the rules written in Beijing, then what? And what should we all be doing? And while India will have an India-Vietnam bilateral sort of approach, India must have, along with Vietnam, along with Quad, along with like-minded partners, a more comprehensive and a broader maritime approach. So there are many workshops which the Embassy of Vietnam enriches by its presence. Many of them relate to broad geopolitical issues. None of them, other than the NMF, focus entirely upon the maritime aspects of this particular set of equations. And so I would reiterate Satyam's exhortation to all of you to please pay attention to the emails and the Varuna alerts. We will be looking to you for your support as we launch into the third of these maritime workshops with the Embassy of Vietnam. We are not pulling punches in these workshops. We are not faffing around, and it's not one of those, how lovely to see you, darling, please pass the scones workshop. These are workshops. They will work. And so I hope that we will see many of you present there. Thank you once again, Dr. Do. Thank you, flag officers. And thank you, officers, officials, academic doyens, and students and interns and everybody else. Thank you so much. Satyam, you can close it down now.
Thank you. Vice
Thank you
Admiral.
so much, sir.
Satyam?